Well, the book of Revelation is what happens to you when you've eaten a large hoagie bowl at 11 o'clock p.m. the night before. And at least that's the popular image, so filled with bizarre, crazy going-ons and dragons and horsemen named Death and lions that look like lambs and robes dipped in blood and pregnant women in numbers pregnant with meaning. And above it all, the image of a boot-stomping, butt-kicking Jesus Christ. And so, it's a common assumption if you watch in pop culture, if you watch any of the shows on Trinity Broadcasting Network, that Revelation is all about the future. That it's, a visual enigma code, completely indecipherable without the help of experts on TPN who are more than happy to give you the timeline. But when we treat the book of Revelation like a Ouija board that predicts the future, we miss the fact that John, he writes down this vision that God gives him. He smuggles it out of his prison island. Rome has locked him in, and he sends it out to his churches, not to warn them of what's to come in some distant future, unrelated to where they are and how they live, but to remind them. He sends these letters to remind them of what has already come to pass, once and for all, in Jesus Christ. The book of Revelation, there is some future in it, but primarily it's not about future. St. John draws in scene after scene, in image after image, in metaphor and symbol. He draws upon the cross. It's all about the cross. Here in chapter 12, John describes this vision of a heavenly battle going on between the forces of Satan and the forces of God. He paints this scene of cataclysm and destruction for a reason. The powers of this world are in this fight to win. And what John does is give us his front row seat to God's engagement with these powers, with those rulers ruling our world, powers which threaten to take over and decimate our world by forever preventing God's transforming work of new creation. The destruction John sees is the result of this confrontation of God's constructive new creation making fight against these forces. God is fighting for his world, for us, for you, all that he has made and all the things that he has called good. The byproduct of that fight, because there are those who resist, those who want nothing of God's good world as God has created it to be. There is, as a result, the storm of war, the abuse and misuse and twisted politics and protests and chaos of all sorts that would render our world a wasteland. On one side of the battle is, of course, the dragon, whom the Old Testament portrays throughout as those evil kingdoms that persecute God's people. There's Egypt and Pharaoh. In Isaiah, Pharaoh is portrayed as a beast. In Ezekiel, he is a great crocodile. In the Psalms, he is a mighty sea monster. In John's Revelation, the ruler of this world, the dragon, is Satan. But John doesn't stop there. John gives the dragon 10 horns to say that he wields his authority with great power and great strength. And he gives him 7 heads, each crowned with crowns, 7 crowns with 7 diadems on each crown. Crowns of royalty. These are the great men who rule. The same number every one of John's churches would know instantly as the number of Roman emperors, from the regime that killed Jesus to the regime that threw John in prison and now persecutes his churches. 7 different regimes, same rule, same power. John draws Satan out as the ancient serpent, at odds with God and God's people. As a reminder that the international evil, the source of all the horror in our world that once hounded and afflicted and exiled Mother Israel, also once killed Jesus and now seeks to ensnare God's people in the great power of sin with a capital S. This is the evil that has afflicted God's creation from the beginning. In John's time, Satan is hidden behind Caesar's throne, and Rome is his public face. The two are so tightly bound that you know not where one ends and the other begins, and much like J.R. Tolkien's grim Wormtongue, whispering into King Theoden's Rohan's ear. When the dragon speaks, it uses Caesar's mouth to speak. Now, if you could take this as, well, no governments are good. Well, that's not what John's trying to say. But he is saying that all governments are vulnerable and easily can be misused. And so this Satan, he's a shape-shifting presence, locking and loosing his coils, appearing and reappearing at different times in different places. The corrupting force, wherever rule, wherever authority, wherever power is being exercised. And sometimes he might appear in the Kremlin or in Kiev, or sometimes his voice is heard at the White House, or sometimes at number 10 Downing Street and even in London, appearing, reappearing here and there, Brussels or Beijing, Tehran, Jerusalem, always appearing, disappearing, and reappearing. His purpose to sabotage, to sow discord and dissolution, chaos and destruction, and finally death of all that God has made and calls good. On the other side of the battle that John sees is this archangel Michael, who in the Hebrew Scriptures personifies the power and the might of God. And in the middle is Satan's sights here in chapter 12. This is a woman crowned with 12 stars. That's Mother Israel with her 12 tribes, and from whom comes the Messiah. And Michael, the archangel Michael, the power of heaven, throws the dragon down. But notice John says it's the blood of the Lamb that conquers and defeats the dragon. You see, John, what he's telling us the story, the same story that the Gospels tell us. Here he's telling us the story of Jesus and of his death and resurrection, the passion story, not only from the perspective of those gathered around Jesus on the ground in Gethsemane, but also from the perspective of heaven. And what John wants you to see is that if you could sit down in heaven's throne and look down upon the cross and see it as the angels see it, then you would see this cosmic battle. That's when Jesus collides with the powers of Rome, of the religious authorities, the mobs who scapegoat him and betray him. And what's really going on is God is on a collision course once and for all with the powers of sin, evil, and death. Things that are wielded by Satan to destroy what God has made. And what John shows us, this great dragon with seemingly superior authority and power, is that to that of God's, with what looks like complete command and control. Yet it is vastly inferior to the sovereign authority of this woman child. In Jesus, you see, the kingdom of God and his authority have come. In the Gospels of Luke, Jesus says of Satan, I saw him fall like lightning from heaven. Already at the beginning of his ministry, we can see the end. And so, immediately Jesus sends out the 70 to give witness to Jesus and what Jesus is doing, giving them power over evil because Satan no longer has any claim on God's people. And John says Jesus engages the devil with the sword of his mouth, defeating him. You've all seen that movie, the old movie, comes around every year at Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life. Indebted to Dr. Brian Blount for this analogy. There's an old Mr. Potter, there's that evil despot, the banker who steals money from George Bailey, and putting Bailey into debt. And when it looks like George is going to be going to jail, the good news comes, that his friends suddenly rally behind him, and George's old friend wires a credit of $25,000 to him. And suddenly what was a terrible situation, which would have put him in jail, becomes a celebratory time for them. And then there's Clarence the angel. I mean, that's sort of a disappointing name. I mean, what kind of angel name is Clarence? I don't have anything against him, that name, because, what kind of name is Morton? I mean, it's a good name, right? It's a good name, but it's not a popular name. I've never heard anybody else's name named Morton. So it's not a bad name, really, I guess, but it's bad enough. Nobody's using it for everybody else but me. The Archangel, nobody was going to name the Archangel Morton or Clarence. I mean, Michael or Gabriel or Raphael. Archangel names. In the movie, we've got Clarence. And even worse, Clarence is a bumbling old fool of a guy. It's disappointing. Angels don't look like that. Angels are fierce fighters. They're warriors. Angels are supposed to be terminators with wings, fighting for good. And in the story, the movie Clarence, the angel shows George Bailey something outrageously dramatic about his life. The angel reveals what the past is, and therefore what the future would look like if George had never been born. And so, George is able to see clearly the meaning and urgency of the life he's got right there in front of him. Things have been clarified for him. Without George, Bedford Falls becomes Pottersville. Because the little things George did helped to give shape to the vibrant community all around him in town, giving hope in hopeless situations, literally saving human lives. And unbeknownst to George, it's not Mr. Potter, but it's George who is the most powerful person in town. Without George, the town would have been a place of servitude and cynicism. As it happened, it was George who turned out to be the one thing standing between a living town, and a town that was dying. And so that's why you can't jump off the bridge and commit suicide, George. That's why God needed you to be the kind of man you were in the past, so that you could be part of creating a kind of hope for the men, women, and future of Bedford Falls in the present. It's a Wonderful Life reveals the truth about George Bailey. It also says something to us about the truth of each one of us. Without us playing the part God would have us play, some part of the world, some part of our community would be dimmer and darker, maybe even broken. Which brings me back to Revelation. John's story reveals something to us dramatically outrageous about our lives. That if we are forced to live with a dramatically outrageous sense of urgency in the present because of that revelation. In Luke's gospel, going back to Luke, the visit with Jesus for just a moment, Jesus sees God's future where the lepers are touched, and so that's what he does. In God's future, Jesus sees a world where women are equal to men and stand shoulder to shoulder with men and are not abused. So he gathers women around him. In God's future, Jesus sees a world where the powerless are lifted up as human beings and not as servile, indentured servants to the powerful. In God's future, Jesus sees where bread is shared and hungry, and the hungry are fed. And those systems, institutional systems, those tribal prejudices and divisions that have become corrupted, that create and perpetuate hunger, are destroyed. In God's world, Jesus sees a future where the demonic powers that consume human lives in violence and poverty are defeated. This is the dramatically outrageous future that John Revelation reveals to us. And Jesus, because that's Jesus' vision, he sets about transforming his present and the present circumstances of God's people so that they can live that future now. That's what apocalypse stories do. And no matter what it takes, it will take a lot because the powers are red in tooth and claw. And they are deeply entrenched and want nothing of the change demanded by God's future. John shows us how destructive this world would be if we did not stand up to the powers who presume this world is theirs. As God's people give witness to the lordship of Jesus Christ over the world. All those little things you do, those tiny little steps that seem to be nothing to you, makes the difference in breaking down the resistance, the barriers of evil. Here's perhaps the most crucial verse in the entire book of Revelation. They, John's people, the 7 churches, conquered him, the greatest power against God that ever existed, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their witness to the lordship of the same bloodied Lamb. John wants his people to know that they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, by their witness. They conquered the dragon. I mean, this is, no ordinary human being can do that, can take that on. This is the dragon. And yet John says they do. Down to earth, ordinary human beings taking on the great power that infests our world to destroy it. And they conquer by the blood of the Lamb. We're the ones he's talking about. We have that kind of power in us because God's Spirit is in us. We're not alone. God's Spirit is in us. And that is the truth that the book of Revelation reveals to us. A battle so intense as people are literally dripping with blood, the blood of the Lamb and their own, and by that blood they turn the dragon's greatest weapon against itself. John describes how the Lion of the tribe of Judah conquers by becoming the executed Lamb. The dragon makes the Lamb and all the Lamb's people bleed to a bloody death. The Lamb resists the power of the dragon by refusing to fight on the dragon's terms. The Lamb wins by losing his life and thus fighting back in a way that nobody saw coming. The greatest powers, the greatest threat that powers have, the greatest weapon that powers have is poverty, hunger, disease, and death. The greatest powers they possess. The dragon deploys that power against the Lion of the tribe of Judah, slaughtering the lion. It's at that moment of defeat that God snatches away the dragon's victory by raising the slaughtered lamb from the grave into everlasting life. And we are the followers of the Lamb who populate those 7 churches in Asia Minor. We follow behind what God has done, is doing by throwing that bloody victory right in the dragon's face every time that dragon exerts its power. Their testimony about the Lamb's blood conquest, 3 stages. It re-energizes that conquest every time they give witness to it. Every time they give witness to what the Lamb's blood has accomplished. Every time. God's Spirit is in it. And every time we give witness to it, offer this to you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.